As many of you know, this week is Black Maternal Health Week. So we wanted to align our webinar presentation, the first of many that we hope to do, focused on grieving in the Black community. But this one is focusing on why are Black mothers grieving differently. And I'm so excited to have Xaviera Bell here with me. She's a new board member. She lives in Raleigh, North Carolina, and she'll have a chance to introduce herself. But really, we'll talk about this, but as you know, the statistics are so high for Black women dying during and after childbirth, and as well as their babies. So we'll talk about that, but really just giving space and opening up a conversation to start talking about this. Okay, hold on. So just some learning objectives for this workshop. So just talking about what is typical in the grieving process after the death of your baby. What are statistics and causes of Black infant mortality? The role of faith in grieving as a Black mom, like we're gonna look deeper into that, and exploring alternative ways to express grief. Maybe then just being open to, there are different ways to approach it and figuring out what works for you or for your clients. Knowing that I know people on here, some are bereaved parents, some are health providers, and maybe there's some family and friends as well. So we're going to try to keep it somewhat broad enough that whoever you are, that you can get something out of it, even if the whole webinar is not applicable to you. And then we're going to talk about ways to support grieving Black moms, like people in her community. So I'm just going to introduce myself before we get started. My name is Kylie Hanish, and I am a doctor of occupational therapy by training. And my husband and I co-created the film Return to Zero. It is actually not on Netflix anymore. It is on iTunes and Amazon. But this is the first feature film that deals with stillbirth as its main theme. And it's based on our story with our son, Norbert, who is stillborn. And so the movie came out in 2014. Our loss was in 2005. And in that time period, we just didn't talk a lot about it. We didn't know other bereaved parents. No one wanted to bring it up with us because it would make us upset. And so now with the movie out, and I started doing retreats for bereaved moms, and then eventually the nonprofit started. So it's all really about helping people not feel alone, talking about the mental health aspect after loss, creating community, and education and empowerment. So, and then that's a picture of my son, Norbert, and he's like a little beautiful baby. And he was stillborn at 35 weeks due to a liver cyst that burst, some very random thing. But I'm honored to be here, to be able to be supporting bereaved parents, educating health providers, and just kind of opening up more conversations. So I'm going to let Zay introduce herself.
Hi, everyone. My name is Xaviera Bell, and I'm not going to stick to the script here because you guys will possibly get a replay. But my son Xander Monroe Dorsland was born April the 25th, so his second birthday is coming up on next Saturday. And so Xander was born at 21 weeks, 6 days, almost 22 weeks, because of a incompetent cervix is what they found. And so during the process of the total, I want to say devastation, because my son was born alive. So I knew that I had limited time. And I did not know what I was going to do with that time, though. I did not know the options that I had in that time. So I had a powwow meeting. I say all the time when I do presentations, I had a powwow meeting with God, and I told him that I was not going to hurt this bad for no reason at all. Like, I needed to find a purpose in my pain. And so his father and I started Zeal of Xander, which is a nonprofit organization, and it kind of just shifted. It went from a nonprofit organization that I did not know what I was going to do with, that kind of looked like having a resource-packed keepsake box for a hospital, specifically the hospital that Xander was born in, UNC. Because on the way home after I had him, one of the employees stopped me in the parking deck and asked me, could I have a piece of cake? Could they have a piece of my cake that was in this huge keepsake box that they use a pastry box. So honestly and truthfully, they really just thought that it was a piece of cake. And so that's what Zeal of Xander started with. Zeal of Xander started because I did not want any other mother or father to have to explain that they came into the hospital with the baby and they're leaving out with the box. However, as time progressed, what I recognized was that statistically, African American women and their children, specifically boys, were at a higher risk than any other demographic. And so what our plan is just to make sure that we have that difficult conversation. So I am certainly excited to be on the webinar with you guys, and I really want you to take the opportunity to ask questions that you really want to ask. This is a safe space, and I want you to be candid with anything that you want to ask. So that is who I am, but you can call me Zay because now we're friends.
Thank you, Zay. Thank you for being here. I'm really excited.
Thank you for having me.
Okay, so we're going to talk a little bit about like setting the stage, Black infant mortality. And Zay, I'm going to let you do this part.
Okay.
And when you need me to shift the slide, I will just do that. If you cannot do that.
I don't think that I can, but
okay.
I don't think so. All right. So, so statistics. So we're going to talk about what has been found as true. Okay. So know that, when we provide you with statistics, this is something that is outside of our bias. So statistically, Black babies are more than twice as likely to die than white babies. Those are statistics. Here in North Carolina, there was an article that was published by the News and Observer, by someone that was provided with a grant. And that was information that was provided to us through that source. What she found, even using just her reach from North Carolina to other different cities, is that one particular city in North Carolina had 11 babies to die in 2000, between 2000, I think it was 2016 that they did the study, and every single one of those babies were Black. So that kind of jarred a conversation. And what they found statistically throughout the continental US is that Black babies are just twice more likely to die than any other children or any other European children. Okay, so we can go to the next one. Okay, so women of color have limited opportunities. And what does that look like? That looks like we're more likely to live in communities with fewer educational resources and employment opportunities due to historical segregation through housing and education policies. Now, also what I do want to bring to light is what we found is I am a African American woman that has a master's degree. I work for a company that provided me with great coverage, healthcare coverage. My company provides us with parental leave up to 16 weeks paid. If I flew out of town on business for my company, they would send my breast milk back home to my newborn. So I don't fall into this category. But what has been found is no matter what your educational status is, specifically with African American women, individuals that have higher educations like bachelor's degrees, master's degrees, or doctorate degrees, we are more likely to lose a child than our European counterpart with no education at all, meaning no high school diploma. Okay, so we can go to the next cause. And we see that there's a couple of questions in the chat as well, or a couple of things here in the chat. So I'm going to try to keep that open as well so that we can kind of monitor that.
I think people were asking if they can ask questions. So
Sure.
I have the chat box open.
Okay.
We cannot hear you. You're muted. So if you have a question, type it in the chat box. But we will also allow for a time for questions at the end too. So if you want to wait to see if we cover it, but type something in if you have a question, and we'll keep an eye.
Nice. Okay, so the second thing is women of color are pretty much faced with accumulated stress. So that's regardless of socioeconomic status. You know, for women of color who attain a higher SES, which would be me, pregnancy-related outcomes are worse, like we discussed, than the white women at a lower SES. And so why is the question that we have. I can recall, and I'm just putting in my personal experience. I recall going to a doctor's appointment. So the doctor's appointment, when I went in, I said, hey, I am experiencing a bit more, a little stomach cramping a little bit. I'm experiencing a little more fluid than normal. I'm also experiencing a little bit more spotting. And so I said, I feel like Xander is kicking my cervix. And my doctor said, well, let me just do a swab. So she did a swab and she said, there's no infection detected and your cervix is not open. So it could just be that you're constipated, that this was the week prior to me having Xander. And I said, oh, okay. So me being a individual that I feel or I deem as responsible, all the concerns that I had for my pregnancy or during my pregnancy, I posed those to my healthcare provider. However, what was not taken into consideration was that what was going on the inside of me was not being reflected on the outside. So if my healthcare provider had done an ultrasound, she would have seen at that time that my cervix was funneling, which led to me delivering my son early. So some of the things when it comes to the accumulated stress is that there are a lot of factors. We feel as a I want to say as a community of African American women or Black women, is that we are not heard. Even when we pose the concern or the question in the most educated way, we recognize that the package that we present is still not well received. So that in itself is stressful, to go into a situation where we feel like no matter how we present it, our concerns will not be heard. And statistically, that has been found to be true. So the third cause is implicit bias in the healthcare system. And so this slide kind of triggers a lot of, I want to say, deflation in me. Like, I feel deflated when I even have to discuss implicit bias. And the reason that I feel deflated is because, honestly and truthfully, I felt that we had progressed so much in, as a community, as a society, as a world. But to know that when I walked into a place or walked into a healthcare facility, I had already had the deck stacked against me. I can remember walking into a place, and without even asking me for my insurance information, they asked me, "Are you on Medicaid?" And and immediately my thought process was, what is it about me that makes you believe that that's my only option? So there are already some biases that are established, specifically triggered by my outer appearance. So when it comes to the worst birth outcomes, what we know what that means is either African American women are dying because they are not heard about their complaints. Medically, it has been proven that practitioners believe that African American women have a higher threshold for pain. So the concerns in regards to us being in a certain level of pain or providing our providers with information that we are in pain, it is not heard. It is not considered, and it is not a concern. There has been a great number of women that die preventably because they are just not heard. And just to kind of give you just some, and if you notice that I'm looking over here, it's because I also have some statistics pulled up. And it says that in 2018, the overall preterm birth rate rose for the fourth consecutive year. These are facts here that I found in North Carolina as well as throughout the US. And it says that the preterm birth rate among Black women is 49% higher than the rate of any other woman. 49% higher. That means that we are having our children prior to our due dates. Now, what does that also mean? That also means for me that I went into my healthcare provider, and they looked at, because I came from Florida. So when I came from Florida, of course, I went and they provided me with my due date, which was August the 20th of 2018. And when I went to my practitioner here in North Carolina, because I did make a move, my job transferred me here. So they looked at the ultrasound and the information and said, your son is measuring small. So what we also have found statistically is that there was a study done on African immigrants. So African immigrants that came over to the US were, when they were pregnant in their first year, started to have children that were equal in weight of our European counterparts or our white counterparts, right? Equal in weight. As they started to track generationally, by the third generation, their children measured small and underweight. So African American women have babies that are smaller than white women. And that is also, can be also associated with the accumulated stress in the environment, because there is no way that a first generation African can come to the States and have a 8-pound or better baby, and then 3 generations down, your children are 5 pounds. Statistically, that does not make sense, except for the fact of the additional stress. So when I went to the hospital or went to my doctor's appointment, they looked at my son and said, he is measuring small. What we're going to do is change your due date. So they changed my due date by 10 days. So his due date went from August the 20th to August the 30th. When I went to the hospital, they informed me, we cannot intervene or save Xander because Xander is 21 weeks and 6 days. Immediately, it knocked the air out of me. And the reason that it knocked the air out of me, one, not only because I was losing my son, but because my healthcare provider changed my due date by 10 days. If they would have allowed Xander's due date to stay the same, Xander would have been over 23 weeks. But because he was 21 weeks, they did not intervene. When I had Xander, Xander came out and he kicked his mother in the leg. I always tell this story. He kicked his mother in the leg like, Mom, this is just not a good time. I was not ready. And of course, I was not ready either. But I remember our nurse saying, he is bigger than I anticipated. She was a Black nurse. She said, should I call the NICU? And I remember my doctor, who was a white male, looking at her and said, no, we should not. And time again, that has played like, why would you say no? Why was it a no? When she said, he is measuring much larger than we anticipated. Why was it a no? And that's what implicit bias looks like. Implicit bias looks like a no when any other situation, it could have been a yes, right? So the next slide number 4, is access to healthcare. Now, women in poverty experience a more challenging life circumstances. And so what we know is that sometimes what that looks like is the working poor. It looks like, hey, I am not making a living that can sustain me, but the living overqualifies me for services. So I can't afford health care, and you're in a situation where you cannot not afford health care, right? I was in a meeting with a group of individuals, and we were just talking about policy here. And one of the things that, you know, we were definitely pushing for, and this is definitely not a policy webinar, but I just want to give you a look as to what it looks like when you don't have a certain level of services. So there was a individual who had a baby or a child that could have been saved. So she went to her doctor, and they said, your son's heart rate is a little bit slow. It's slowing. What we're going to have to do is we are going to have to deliver him early. We're going to have to deliver him today. So with the delivery of that day, they sat her in a waiting room and told her that she would have to wait until something becomes available. And she sat there for hours. By the time they took her for the emergency cesarean, her son was deceased. What does that mean for her too? What that also means is that during her pregnancy, she had a pap smear done, and they found cancerous cells on her cervix. By the time she had her son through the emergency cesarean, because he was deceased, her Medicare or her Medicaid services stopped because he was not living. By that time, she was in stage 4 cancer, cervical cancer. So not only did she lose her son, but now she has to go through a horrendous chemo, and cervical cancer is so preventable. So we're looking at the fact that we have limited access to healthcare services. We're looking at the fact that we don't have the best choices in food, because not only can we not afford healthcare, but a lot of us cannot afford good food options. Specifically individuals that live in rural areas, right? So your options are, do I drive 30 miles to a Whole Foods or a farmer's market, or do I drive 2 miles to the McDonald's and get a McDouble for $1 or a chicken sandwich for $1? So those are the options that we're looking for. Or I don't have transportation at all. Can I catch a ride somewhere? And oftentimes that is no. It could also be housing. You don't live in an environment that is conducive to healthy living practices. You are living in an area that is too far to travel to a doctor, or you're living in the area that adds additional stress to you because it is not the safest place. So all of those things add to the situation that we have when it comes to birth and birth practices. Okay, and slide number 5 says systemic racism. I think that that's just self-explanatory. Social and economic forces of institutionalized racism. That is just what it is. When you walk into a place, immediately what is noticed is that you are a Black woman. And there are long-term consequences in regards to that. There are individuals that walk out of the hospital with no wife and no baby, or no partner and no baby, or just a baby, right? So they're faced with having to raise a child during the moments of trying to process the fact that they have lost their long-term partner. Or men are coming out of the hospital with no baby and a partner. They're grieving and they're trying to figure out, how do I support you as my partner? That was the hardest thing for Xander's dad. Xander's dad did not know what to do. He did not know, how do I help you when I am dying myself? I don't know what to do with that. How is it that I can be the best partner for you during this time when I need somebody to help me? And those are the things that we are really facing here when it comes to the fact that, why does Black grief look different? Is because we have so many different causes as to why we don't have time to grieve. And those causes are racially based. Okay, I don't think that we have another slide.
No.
Okay, so
Thank you.
Thank you.
And we're gonna come back. I'm gonna talk now a little bit about what grief looks like. I'm gonna do this quickly so that we can get to the conversation piece, which I think is probably more interesting. But just looking at grief, grief is individual. Grief doesn't have a timeline, but it expresses itself in so many different ways. And so these are just some things that I chose off of our website. There's a more thorough description of grief on our website. If you just go to the parent section and start here, there is a link to normal grief reactions. Yeah, and someone said, we're going through this now. I mean, I will say, yes, the collective grief that we're going through with COVID is definitely bringing up a lot of this, and it's probably bringing up your own grief from your own losses that you maybe thought that you'd kind of work through. But just being aware that it does look different for everyone and it changes over time, and it's kind of like it's changing, it's moving, it's individual, and that's just kind of what I want to say about that. And then looking at societal reactions to death, like we're not really comfortable as a society in dealing with death. We're afraid of it. A lot of times when our babies are stillborn or die shortly after birth, this is the first time that we've seen a dead body. And it's really scary. We don't know what to expect. And, you know, I think not knowing what that's going to be like, the fear of the unknown, it makes it even worse, right? But it is your baby and you're going to love your baby. But looking back at society, like we have a lot of times a lack of rituals surrounding death. It becomes a taboo subject because people are afraid of it. They don't talk about it. But then that leaves the people who have experienced grief alone, that they feel like they're going crazy and they're isolated, and there's no support and guidance that they're receiving. And so I think that a lot of times problems arise when what we're feeling inside is not supported and by the outside, because we can't express it. You know, we have to like put on a certain mask when we deal with people on the outside. We don't want to upset them. Like sometimes it turns to us, you know, consoling them so that they don't feel uncomfortable. But when you have like this, you know, this difference between who you are, what you're going through inside, and what you're allowed to express outside, that brings about problems. And this is just a quote that we like: understanding that you don't get over, you don't move on. Your baby is, you love your baby, and this is about love. And so it's not like you will never stop loving that baby, but it changes, but you don't get over it. And I think that's why it's important to work on your grief and your healing and your growth, is that if you don't do anything, nothing happens to it. It just stays there, and obviously will fester if you're not dealing with it. But you know, working on it, participating in it, doesn't mean it's like you do it once and you move on. It is a process that takes a lifetime, really. And then looking at trauma responses. So understanding that when you lose a baby, that there is grief that you're going through. You've lost someone that you love, but it's also a traumatic event that you've been through. So what does trauma look like? These are just some ways that trauma expresses itself. A lot of times there's an overlap between grief and trauma, and I don't necessarily think that it's important to know like, oh, these things are grief and these things are trauma, and then we have postpartum in there as well. But just being aware that these are all factors and they can express themselves in different ways. I think with trauma, you know, a big thing that tends to come out is the anxiety, hyperarousal, and hypervigilance. That part of your nervous system is activated, and that's what I see. But again, it expresses itself differently in different people. And then just here's some more different expressions of trauma. If you go to our website, in the parent section, there is a section called Navigating Trauma that you can look at this again on your own time. There's also, if you're a provider, a section, the providers section on the website that looks a little bit more into the research behind the mental health piece of pregnancy and infant loss. But like, you have flashbacks, you can't concentrate, you avoid certain places or things, those types of behaviors. And then, as I mentioned, acknowledging that postpartum changes do happen. You have had a baby, but it's not just the birth mother who is going through this. It's everybody, whether you're a dad, a partner, a surrogate, an adoptive parent. You can also develop perinatal mood disorders. And so just this makes it a little bit more complicated, right? Like, our bodies are changing. So these are some changes as a result of hormones. Mostly, the first 1, 2, 5 bullet points are in the birth mother, but the mental health piece, depression and anxiety, can affect everybody else involved as well. And then just acknowledging that perinatal mood disorders often occur in parents experiencing perinatal loss. So just the rates of depression and post-traumatic stress disorders or post-traumatic stress symptoms are much higher in parents who have had a loss than if you have not had a loss, which makes sense, but there is research to back it up. So I guess right now, before we start talking, are there any questions about what we've covered so far? I don't want to spend, maybe just like allow for 5 minutes, and if we want to do that, and then we'll just open up the conversation. And I'm going to stop the screen share because we are done with this part for now.
And feel free to ask me anything that you guys want. I just want to kind of reiterate that this is definitely a safe space. There is no judgment here. Unfortunately, what this is the best way that I can describe the space that we're in. The space that we're in is, it's like we're in a sorority that we did not want to join. Did not want to join it. However, there is a sisterhood or a community or tribe of individuals, no matter what our demographic is. The common denominator is that we have lost something great. We have suffered a great loss. So please, feel free to ask me anything. And I think that there are a couple of questions here. So Kylie, did you want me to read them, or did you want to read them?
Also, Carolyn is asking, are there any major differences between non-bereaved parents with a perinatal mood disorder and bereaved parents? And I think, just speaking from what I know so far, so I haven't come across anything in the research that I have seen, but what I will say is that it's just more complicated because it's not just the perinatal mood disorder, it's grief and trauma added to that, and you're dealing with more things. And then Jillian is asking you, Zay, if you ever went back to the doctor that said, no, don't take Xander to the NICU.
I did not. And one is because I could not find that particular doctor. But the second thing is, prior to having Xander, I called a meeting of every single person that would come in contact with my son and myself. my hospital room looked like a training room because there were so many doctors and nurses. And so what I required was every person that is going to touch my son and cannot save him, I need for you to come into my hospital room, and I need for you to explain to me why in my face. And that is the task that I provided them with. And so everyone said, and I remember the nurse practitioner that was over the NICU, she looked at me and she said, I know that you want to be a mom, but this is not the way to do it. And I kind of sat back because I could not believe that as a professional, that's what you were saying to me. And I remember the doctor saying, you are a mother and you have done the best that you could do with the situation that you have. And so ultimately, the reason that they did not assist, the common reason that everyone provided me with was, he's just too small. He's not 23 weeks. We do not have the equipment to assist him and to intervene and do life-saving procedures because he's just too little. So that was the common answer. And Krista said, how can we help to make a difference? You know what? I think that the best way to help to make a difference is to not be quiet about it. I enjoy having hard conversations. And this is not an easy conversation to have. It is not an easy conversation to look at some of the best friends that I have who are white women to say, what white privilege looks like for you is that you don't have to worry about going to a hospital and walking out. Your biggest concern is who's going to put the car seat in the car on the way home. My biggest concern is, am I going to die? Or is my son going to die? When Xander was born, Krista asked, how much did he weigh? Xander was 21 weeks, 6 days, 11 inches long, and 1 pound. So he was about 15 ounces, 15 ounces is what they measured him at. So he was almost a pound. He was 1 ounce shy of a pound.
Okay, I'm going to stop right here. There's a lot of good questions. We don't have enough time. So I think what we're going to do is start. I have like 4 conversation questions that I want to ask you, Zay.
Sure.
What we will do is we will look at the questions in the chat. If they're not answered during this time, we can either stay on and answer them, or we can write written responses. But I know it's already 10:45 and I just want to make sure that we can a little bit stay on time. Okay. So the first question I'm going to ask you is, sure, can you talk briefly about the role of faith in grieving in the Black community?
I can. So I'm a church kid. And what that means is that I was raised in Alabama, Mobile, Alabama. And our first resource in my community, in the Black community, is going to God. So I remember going to my therapist, and I had a therapist at UNC, which was a great therapist that specialized in postpartum and perinatal loss. That was what her expertise was. And I remember people saying, well, I think that this is just something that you should probably think about. That you should think about, and you should also pray about it and let God handle it, because God makes no mistakes. And my immediate response was, I don't have any interest in talking to God at this point. I'm mad at him. I don't want to have a conversation with him. I do not want him to have a conversation with me. What I want to do is talk to my therapist. And there was also a guilt that came with that, because in my community, God is the first source. He makes no mistakes. He, sustains us. He provides us with, all that we need, and we are not to question what he does. And what I had to come to the realization was, with my own personal my own personal relationship with God is that the God that I serve, I can ask questions to, and he is big enough to handle the tantrum, or he is big enough to handle the anger that I have. And I think that we have, as a culture, we really have to stop putting a stigma on what our faith looks like and putting it in a box, and it not providing us with the foundation that it was established to. So we find healing in church, and but healing also happens outside of that too.
And then my next question is, how can you express your grief within the Black community? So you and I have talked a little bit about how sometimes, right, that there's accepted ways to grieve, and then other ways are maybe not supported by your family members, and so how do you navigate that? I mean, and the next question kind of dovetails into that, in terms of advocating for yourself within your family and workplace, but if you want to combine them or keep them separate.
Yeah. So I think that, like you said, that they kind of go hand in hand. And so I will always say, advocate for yourself. You know, there were a lot of people that said that, you know, you need to focus on just healing. When I started Xander's nonprofit organization, Xander was born and passed away April the 25th. 90 days, within 90 days, there was a nonprofit established for Xander, and I started to work on that and build relationships with communities and other established organizations. And so what that was looked upon was, you're being busy so that you don't have to really focus on your grieving. And so I started to question myself about, you know, what I was doing and about how the grief process was for me. And then I had to take into consideration is that grieving is personal, right? It is how you deal with your grief, how you deal with it. For you, if it's going to sustain you, it's appropriate. And that is what I had to learn. In my community, people wanted to give me suggestions as to what I could do. Suggestions as to when an expiration date was supposed to take. Oh, you know, this is the last birthday party that you need to have for Xander. Because Xander had a first birthday party. We had a cake, and we do a lantern release on his birthday. Because for me, I need to know that I don't forget him. And I need to celebrate the moments that I had with him, although it was only 4 hours and 16 minutes. So for me, a birthday party is appropriate for him every year. For others, it is uncomfortable. So this is my advice to you. Grieve how you don't feel guilty in the end. It's just that simplistic. Advocate for yourself. Be an advocate for your peace. If something is disturbing your peace, because there is peace in grief. The way that I grieved my son gave me such a sense of peace that I recognized that my lifestyle was enough, and that I did not have to explain anything that I did in regards to how I took great care of him in his death. My job as Xander's mother was supposed to be to make sure that he was a purposeful man, that he grew up in integrity, that he was a upstanding citizen. I did not get that opportunity. I was robbed of that. So my job as a parent shifted to ensure that he was as purposeful in his death as he would have been in his life. And the way that I grieve him and carry out his memory is, I have to be accountable to ensure that it's purposeful. So grieve in a purposeful way.
And if people around you are not supportive of that, how, like, what would you say? Like, how do you deal with it? Okay, no, but if it's your
Listen,
family,
yeah,
what do
because
you
guess what I
do?
had to do when it came to, because some of my family did not understand why I was grieving in that particular way. And what I had to do was I had to allow for them to be my family, but not allow for them to be my support system. And I think that we have to understand that people that are your family are not, that does not give them a free pass to be in your support system or be in your tribe, right? So people that are your family, they're your family, and so you love them, but you also have to love them in a way that does not break your heart. And when you grieve your children and you want to go to someone, specifically your family members, your immediate family, and you want that support, and every time you go with them, if your conversation ends in tears, or your conversation ends and it's not supportive and you feel deflated, then you have to advocate for yourself enough to know that this is not a conversation that I can have with you. So I have to go to someone that is going to be able to pour into me, because guess what I couldn't do? If my cup is empty, I can't pour into Xander's organization, or I can't pour into the woman that lost her baby this morning and she was 27 weeks. So I have to make sure that I fill my cup. How does my cup feel? By getting involved with people or having associations and relationships with people that are people of substance, that's going to support me, that's going to love me through things, that is going to continuously be advocates for my growth in grief. Because at the end, your grief has to grow you. And you have to get around people that's going to water that seed and not try to dig it up out of the ground. So I think that my best advice would be, hey, being a family member does not give you a free pass to be my support system.
Yeah. And I think that's applicable to anybody grieving,
Yeah.
really.
I remember I watched your movie, and I know that we're on limited time, but I just wanted to say this. And I watched the scene when you were doing the memorial out. I think it was like by maybe some water or something like that. And then there was a portion where your mother um, did a little speech, and how she was saying about having more children. And when you hear that, just that sentence alone for me, it's like the but in the conversation. It's like, I like your hair, but you don't look good in bangs, right? So that means that anything that happened before the but um, is null and void. Like, I'm sorry for your loss, but you can have more children. So I didn't hear the fact that you're sorry for the loss. And so what I definitely want to suggest is, don't live in a but, and don't allow for anyone um, to input buts in your grief process. And you have to guard your heart from that. And that's difficult when you always have people that are close to you that's in your ear, and you have to press pause on those people.
Yeah. Okay,
Even if it's your mom.
even yeah.
Hmm.
I have one more question for you, one more like official question. And then
Okay.
there's a lot of other questions, and we'll just figure out how we're going to do this. But
Okay.
how can a person support the grieving Black mother? So whether it's a family member, a friend, an office mate, I don't know if I'm going to go into the provider. I think the provider area is something totally different that we can talk about as a separately. But what do you think? Like, if the whole dealing with grief is new and a bit uncomfortable, someone's lost a baby, what would you say? Like, how can I support that person?
So I recall going back to work, and I had to go back to work. And I remember sitting in my car, and my job was just so gracious and so great to me. They sent me gift cards. They wanted to buy me lunch, all these things. And so I wanted to make sure that when I went back into the office that I had just a card for them, and that I had donuts, and that I did not come empty handed. Because listen, that's what Southern people do. Southern people feed you. If nothing else, if nothing else, we're going to feed you. And so I drove to my job, and I pulled up in the parking lot, and I was stuck. I sat there, and I had a panic attack in my car, in my company car in the parking lot. I had a panic attack, and I was stuck for 25 minutes. And I did not know what to do. The hardest thing for me was to open the door. And what I recognized was I did not want the looks of pity. Like, how am I gonna deal with how they look at me? I don't want the looks of pity. And I, kind of de-escalated. I took a couple of breaths, and I went into the office, and everybody was like, "Hey, Zay." I was like, "Okay, hey." And so as the day went on, like, nobody came and hovered over me, and nobody, did any of those things. And so I appreciated that. But what really is important for you to understand is that in grief, we're just not looking for you to just come and just pour your heart out. What we're looking for you to do is acknowledge that we're hurting. And I recall one person that did not say anything to me, and they said, "I didn't know what to say to you when you lost your son." And I said, "Yeah, you didn't know what to say." I said, "And the only thing that I realized was that you didn't say anything." So you're not going to have all the answers. Everybody has an expectation of something different in the midst of their grief. But what I will say is, even if you don't know what to say, that is a great place to start. Hey, I do not know what to say, but I want you to know that I am thinking of you. Hey, if you want to chat anytime, please just let me know. Like those little extensions of I'm open to you. Just be open. Now, what not to say is, God needed another flower in his garden. Do not say that.
Yeah.
Don't
Or
ever.
you can get pregnant. At least you can get pregnant.
At least you know you can get pregnant.
Yeah.
You can have other children.
Yeah.
Don't say those things.
Yeah. God has a plan.
Yeah.
Like, don't, even if you believe it and maybe it's true, don't say that.
Do not say it, because I don't see his plan in that moment. I didn't see his plan in that moment. I didn't care about his garden. I didn't care about him having some angels. Listen, girl, I did not care about what Jesus had planned for Xander. All I know is that I wanted to eat cookies with my son. I wanted to continue to build his library of books that I had already started. I wanted to kiss his face as he grew. And I felt that what grief does, or a loss does, it robs you of expectation. I had an expectation to walk him to school on the first day. I had an expectation to um to put him to sleep on my chest and rub his curly hair. I had an expectation to gawk at his beautiful lashes. I had an expectation of those things, and I was robbed of that. So I did not want to hear how God needed more flowers when he has plenty. We are 1 in 4. 1 in 4 women lose babies on a consistent basis. That is statistically found. One mother dies every single day. Every day. Today, somebody's mom is going to die in birth. That's a hard fact. It's a hard fact. So yeah, don't say those things. If you don't know what to say, the best thing to say is, I don't know what to say, but I'm thinking of you. Start with that conversation.
So on the Return to Zero website, in the section of family and friends, there's a whole page on do's and don'ts on what to say and what not to say that I would encourage you to look at. Not you, Zay, but everybody.
I look at them too, guys.
Okay. Okay, what I'm going to do, I'm going to put back the screen share with our emails. Okay. And then there's a lot of really great questions. So I might take a few of them
Okay.
to talk maybe 10, 15 minutes more for those of you who want to stick around and can stick around. We may try to answer some of these via text, like when I'll send out the link to everyone who's registered for the webinar and send out the link to the recording. Mm-hmm. But I just here's our email addresses, the Return to Zero Hope website, if you want to contact us. But let me start asking a few more questions. So this is kind of two questions that are really similar. Like, what are questions that would be beneficial for Black women to ask providers? And how can Black women advocate and fight for themselves without being seen as like crazy or mad Black women? I'm quoting there, but
yes. So listen, you have to do what provides you peace of mind. So one of the things that I found was that my provider I have the right to interview anybody that is going to provide me with a service, right? So questions would be that you can ask is, how many African American patients or clients do you have? That would be one, because it's important to go to a place where your providers have experience in dealing with clients that look like you. Things that you will have is, have an expectation of, this is my birthing plan. Do you believe that you are able to provide me with the services that I am requesting or requiring? You can go in and say, listen, I need to know if I feel uncomfortable. Can I ask you for ultrasounds? Can I ask you for exams? Can I come in to your office to be seen? Those are important questions. If I have a expectation to hear my child's heartbeat on a weekly basis, would you be okay with that? And if they say no, then know that you can go somewhere else. You have that right.
what other advice for Black moms would you give to decrease like the collective fear of the providers and the medical institutions?
Can you ask that one more time? I'm sorry.
So what advice would you have for Black moms to help them decrease their fear of the, going to the doctor, of the whole medical system, I guess, like becoming...
Get a doula. Listen, after I lost my son, one of the implementations that I wanted for his organization was a bereavement doula. I felt like no woman should be told, hey, take this pill, go home and have your baby and pass your child. I felt that nobody should have to deal with having to think about advocating for themselves when they're thinking about, what am I going to do when I have my child? Is it going to look like a baby? Is it going to be quiet in here when I have, my child, or something that way? Get a doula. Get a advocate for you, and have hard discussions. You don't ever want to. A lot of people don't want to discuss death, but let me tell you something. Being pregnant is hard. People, teenagers make it look real easy, because they can go get pregnant, have a child, high pregnancy, not go to the hospital or go to, get any medical attention. But being pregnant and producing a child, a living, healthy child, is a hard task to do. So that's one of the things that you can have a conversation about. Listen, this is what I have an expectation of. This is my birthing plan. This is the expectation that I have. If something goes left, this is the expectation that I have. So that's one of the things that you can do. You can get a doula. If you don't want to have a doula, have those hard conversations with your support system. This is my expectation of you. If I'm in if we're placed in a situation, I need for you to be my partner. I need for you to be my advocate. I need for you to be my cheerleader. I need for you to be the judge, the jury, and the executioner. I need you to be all of those things. Do you think that you can handle that task? And if they say no, find someone that can.
Because when you're in it, you can't advocate for you're just trying to survive. So
That's
yeah,
it.
you need
Yeah.
an advocate. Okay, Carol is asking, what suggestions do you have regarding raising awareness, combating the bias or ignorance of physicians and other medical providers who contribute to the problem of not providing optimal health care, truly informed and compassionate care to Black women? So targeting the healthcare system.
Yeah.
That's a huge question, but
It's a huge question, but you know what, Carol, that is such a great question, because I think that I believe now, and this is being a woman that's 39 years old, I am considered to be someone that is high risk because of my age. They consider me geriatric pregnancy age. So I think that right now, at this point in my life, I believe in putting all of my cards on the table. Listen, provider, statistically, it shows that I am 2 times more likely than my white sisters to lose my child. How do you feel about that statistic? What can you do to ensure, or to help ensure, or to put a plan in place to make sure that we are doing everything we can to save this pregnancy, doing everything that we can to save my life? What can you do? How do you feel about those statistics? Where do you stand in your thought process? And some of them will not be able to answer that question. If they cannot answer that question, find a different provider. Because at the end of the day, you have a choice. You can choose. Know that you can choose.
Melinda, who's on our board, is an RN, and she is I just want to say this out loud. She's recommending creating a document, like a written document that you take to providers with all of these questions written down that you want to ask. Because sometimes, right, we get nervous when we're with a provider and we don't remember everything we want to ask. And I think that's a really great suggestion.
Very great suggestion. And your birthing plan can look like that too.
Yeah. And then, okay, a couple people have asked about specific support for Black moms. So what are your thoughts on that? Like, how, what is out there? What is, do you think that Black women need to seek out support in an environment that is with other Black women? Are there other supports that they should be seeking out that maybe are mixed race? Like, what are your thoughts on that?
So I think you need both. So you definitely need you definitely need an organization or a support group that's multicultural. And the reason why is because you want to just investigate grieving practices, because what someone that in what a white woman is doing may be adaptable. What an Asian woman is doing may be a good practice for you. So you definitely want to take those suggestions. Also, what you ultimately want is for practices that can help you as a Black woman. And the best place to find that is from other Black women too. So you definitely want to have both. You want to have a support group that is made up of women that look like you, and you want a support group that's made up with women that have suffered like you, because you can identify with both of them. And there's a lot of support groups that are out there, a lot of meetups. This is Black Maternal Health Week. Um, Also, this is Minority Health Month. So you can find a great deal. There's a group called Brown Mamas. There's a group called Black Moms Connect that is in Canada as well as the US. There is a group for Black women that have suffered loss as well. So Google is certainly a great tool. And you know, one thing too is you can find Black women in your community that have lost babies that just are not talking about them. And that gives them strength to do that. There were a lot of women that I remember my mother lost 5 children before me. And I recall when we were standing outside of Xander's memorial service or his funeral service at the hospital, at the funeral home, she and my father drove Xander back to Alabama to bury him in our family plot. And I remember my mother taking her hands, and she put her hands on the side of my face like this. She held, here I am with my mother, I think I was a 37-year-old woman, and I'm standing outside with my mother's hands on my face like this, smushing my face in like this. And I remember my mom looking at me saying, the hardest place for a mother is to be in a position where she cannot help her daughter, and I cannot help you. She said, but what I know is this. I know that you have been down before and you are great for a comeback. And I cannot wait to see who you become after this. So even in that time, what my mother did for me was gave me an opportunity to look forward to and after this. And you have to be able to identify with women that look like you, that grew up in your community, that are wise, older individuals. Older women are not talking about this because in their lifespan, they were taught to have the baby, get over it. Because you still have to be a mother, you still have to be a wife, and so when you talk and express within your community, it helps other women. So listen, cleave to individuals in your community, cleave to individuals on the internet that you've never met before, but the commonality is that you guys have grieved and hurt, and have a grief community that's made up of people that you can look at that looks like you, and people that you can look at that has hurt like you.
Okay. Thank you. Okay, we have to wrap up, but somebody said they got a bounce back from your email.
Okay, so if you get a bounce back from my email, you can send your emails to zillofxander@gmail.com.
Can you spell that? I'll write that in the box.
Sure, and I can write it too.
Oh, okay, you can write it. So first of all, Zay, I just want to say thank you so much for being here, for sharing your story, for being open and talking about hard topics. Thank you. And thank all of you who are here and have participated with us in this and whatever. You know, I'm excited. And I also, we want to hear, like, what else do you want to hear on, you know, on the topic of grief in the Black community? Yeah. Because we want to do more of these, and we want to do more webinars in general, but just like, we want to hear from you. So send us an email. let us know what you want to hear. So yeah, hi Janae. Yeah, so we can just kind of start doing things. And I'd also would love to put some of this information about like what questions to ask, that type of stuff on the website so people can pull from that and all that. But thank you so much. I will send out a link to the recording and some links to other things soon. But thank you for being here. Thank you for participating, and have a great day.
Thank you, guys.
Bye.
Bye-bye.